Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to take a close look at two competing narratives now circulating about who was really behind the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, as a fresh FBI and RCMP warning lands on Gurdwara Singh Pannun, and a Canadian federal court fight breaks out over what evidence the public gets to see. And we've got a new video and a fresh headline in the aftermath of Edmunton Gurdwara stabbings, and an update on Sajjan Kumar, of course that convicted 1984 riots or genocide figure, whose death is still making waves inside the Congress Party even a week later. All this and more on today's show, and of course loads of your comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for those. Right, let's get underway, and I want to start with a bit of an update on what is going on around the killing of Nijjar 3 years ago. Because this story, it just keeps developing by the day. And where the challenge is less what's happened and more who do you believe. Now, Nikhil Gupta, that name that sort of obviously crops regularly up in this story, he's the Indian national who pleaded guilty back in February to a federal murder for hire conspiracy to assassinate Gurdwara Singh Pannun, allegedly on the instructions of the Indian government. And he now has a sentencing date, the 20th of November, and in a Manhattan federal court with federal guidelines apparently recommending a minimum of 20 years. So he's going to spend pretty much the rest of his life behind bars if he's found guilty. Now, as that date approaches, Gurdwara Singh Pannun himself, he says the FBI visited him in person just a few days ago, the 20th of August, to warn him not to travel until a new unspecified threat is resolved. And the FBI, by design, didn't obviously then disclose the details of the plot itself, as they tend not to. And then, just a few days later, the 26th of August, the RCMP separately contacted him by phone with a similar warning. And both were then delivered under the American Duty to Warn framework, which, again, we've talked a lot about these in recent days, which those are those legal mechanisms that cover credible and specific threats of murder, severe bodily harm or kidnapping, of course. So, yeah, Pannun has just received fresh death threats, and he's been warned by both the RCMP and the FBI that his life is now imminently in danger. And let's just jump back to Nikhil Gupta, because this, of course, Nikhil Gupta is implicated in the Gurdwara Singh Pannun assassination plot itself. So just to remind you, just to recap a little bit about Nikhil Gupta himself, because this sentencing date suddenly now actually becomes very relevant, the 20th of September. Now, Gupta himself was arrested in the Czech Republic 3 years ago, mid-2023, and that was at the request of the American authorities, and then he was extradited back to the US. Now, the plot, as laid out by the Department of Justice, involved an undercover law enforcement, that DEA operative posing as a contract killer, meaning the plan to kill Gurdwara Singh Pannun on American soil was then disrupted before it obviously ever came to being carried out. Now, Nikhil Gupta's guilty plea in February closed that chapter of the case, at least as far as his own culpability goes, his own potential guilt. And what happens on the 20th of November, sorry, not September, 20th of November. So what happens on the 20th of November is technically just mainly about the question of his sentence length. And prosecutors are pushing for, obviously, the worst end of federal guidelines. But this is the same legal mechanism involved with Nikhil Gupta, but it's not the same specific threat as we've talked about in the past. Because back in August, the RCMP issued its own duty to warn letters to two other Canadian Sikh activists who I've mentioned this week already, Inderjit Singh Gosal and Manjinder Singh, over what the RCMP called credible, serious and imminent threats to their lives. And again, obviously echoing the murder of Nijjar. And Inderjit Singh Gosal said on the record, he rejected it. And he actually said this quote, it's a very sort of resilient, very typical Sikh activist quote. "For me to stop doing what I'm doing, which is impossible, the threats are going to continue. I will continue to do exactly what Hardeep Singh Nijjar did. If the bullet is the ending for me, I'm glad to take that bullet." So again, very typical, robust response from a typical Sikh. But that's the context that's worth talking about, because of course this isn't the first time this specific US-Canadian legal mechanism has been used on a Sikh activist this year. And taken together now with the FBI's public safety announcement on transnational repression, again the report about recently issued the same week that those Canadian duty to warn notices were issued, again, is painting a pattern that both governments are clearly aware that something is going on, even if they're not very publicly talking about it. Now, Gurdwara Singh Pannun, for his part, unsurprisingly, he's been completely defiant. This is, it's typical Gurdwara Singh Pannun. He's a brave guy. You've got to take your hat off to him. And he said, quote, "I'm not afraid of their death threats," and that the continued threats give him what he called courage and confidence that his campaign is working. And he said, "I'm going to continue, even at the cost of a bullet." So, again, it's typical, robust Sikh activist response. I will not back down in the face of oppression or harassment or bullying or whatever. But ultimately, the fact that the FBI and RCMP have had to issue warnings on top of Gupta's sentencing date, these are all significant things that are going on. And this fresh threat against Gurdwara Singh Pannun lands in the middle of a story that is actually split into 2, maybe even 3 competing accounts that's going on this week. And I'm talking through each one of them in turn, because they're all quite significant stories. And a little bit of background. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, of course, was that Sikh activist, that Khalistanis activist, the Gurdwara president who was murdered outside his Gurdwara 3 years ago, June 2023. And of course, Justin Trudeau, then Prime Minister, publicly called out the Indian government, saying he had credible evidence that India were behind that targeted murder. And diplomatic fallout, still not healed really, and separately 4 Indian nationals were then charged by Canadian authorities with murder and conspiracy over that killing. They were Amandeep Singh, Karanpreet Singh, alleged to be the killers, and then Kamalpreet Singh and Karan Brar, alleged to have been the getaway driver. And all 4 were arrested in May 2024, and that is still very much an ongoing mainstream legal case. But that is a separate matter entirely from the US Department of Justice case against the gangster Lawrence Bishnoi and Goldie Brar over the same killing. 2 different countries, 2 different sets of defendants over one underlying death. So again, you start to see all the threads that are involved in this whole complex network of legal cases. Now, the Canadian prosecution has its own, I suppose, developments this week, in fact, because Canada's Attorney General has apparently filed a federal court application, originally lodged actually back on the 24th of December last year, seeking to keep certain intelligence out of the trial record. Now, that intelligence, this is really important, because that intelligence has apparently been sourced from allied services, including here in the UK, the FBI, CIA, presumably in the US, and it reportedly alleges Indian government direction of the killing. In other words, it is believed that Five Eyes evidence, which the Canadian legal service are using, they are trying to keep out of the public domain, trying to stop it being heard in public because it may potentially prejudice the case. And likewise, as they say, the government's stated reason is they don't want to risk international relations and national security. But again, the significance of that, it is likely that evidence that they are trying to withhold is the very evidence that we need to see that points to India, the Indian state, Indian government, responsible for the killing of Bhai Nijjar. And the case itself, does remain in this sort of publication banned pre-trial phase. So you're actually not allowed the media is not allowed to discuss it. So there is obviously a limit to certainly what we know and what's been released into the public domain. But the fact that Ottawa is now actively fighting to keep incriminating intelligence out of the public domain is in itself a very significant and reportable development in this. And then, and I'm going to jump back to Gurdwara Singh Pannun, because
जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह हिंदुस्तान दे करिंदे
I'll let Gurdwara Singh Pannun rant in the background. 2 days after the federal court story broke, and a couple of days after, you remember that leaked audio first surfaced that reportedly captured Goldie Brar admitting to killing Nijjar, which so we talked about earlier in the week. Pannun Pannun released his own this video, naming 6 individuals that he holds responsible for Bhai Nijjar's death. They are Lawrence Bishnoi, Goldie Brar, Karan Brar, no relation, Amandeep Singh, Karanpreet Singh and Kamalpreet Singh. And he alleges that all 6 were apparently operating for Indian agencies, as he says specifically. And he vowed then, in his own words, that they would be brought to justice even if they escaped the FBI and Canadian and US courts. Now, all of this obviously never been independently verified. They are Pannun's own allegations. And put it in the same way that the gang war framing that India and, of course, this Goldie Brar leaked audio is framing, again, it's just allegations. But what is definite and what's new is that Pannun has now named all 6 people together in one place, real charged defendants in the Nijjar murder case, alongside the gang associates named in the US case. So he's actually deliberately brought them all together. So we have the US case, the Canadian case, and he's just saying they are all part of the same plot. I mean, it's not a massive leap of logic to come to that conclusion, but he is the first person publicly really to now publicly say it's all part of the same Indian state plot. But it does come back to the leaked audio itself as well, and actually just a bit of a correction that many people have made a mistake on. And it's all about the names, and I gave a clue just a second ago. A separate claim began circulating from Sikhs for Justice, alleging that this Karan Brar was the actual assassin, and he was the guy paid kill money by a named Raw station chief. Now, of course, at the time, some of that claim's own circulation then started mixing up Karan Brar with Goldie Brar. Of course, Goldie Brar is the actual person named in the US case, the Department of Justice case. And, of course, you've got to be very careful about these names. Anyway, checking further, they are 2 very distinct people. Goldie Brar, Karan Brar are real distinct publicly named individuals. So Sikhs for Justice underlying claim does name a real defendant in a real case. What remains entirely unverified is their specific allegation that he was paid by Indian intelligence. Sajjan, it still remains, at this moment, just an allegation. We have no proof. But specifically, they do name a guy called Pawan Kumar Rai, who they describe as the Raw Station Chief in Ottawa. And this is something that Gurpreet Singh Pannun's naming. And Rai is a real figure, is a real person. Canada expelled an Indian diplomat identified as the Raw Station Chief back in September 2023. Was it this guy? This happened just in the days immediately following Trudeau's original allegation in Parliament. That expulsion, I can't say the word, that expulsion did happen. And of course, it's a matter of diplomatic record. So, but whether that same individual actually paid so-called kill money to Karan Brar, as Sikhs for Justice are trying to claim, well, it's still, as I say, it's unverified. And Sikhs for Justice's own claim is not an established fact. But again, it's not a huge leap of logic to come to these conclusions. But it does come back to this whole sort of gang warfare argument. And back in India, this guy, Sanjay Verma, he's the India's former High Commissioner to Canada. He's actually given the first named official adjacent Indian reaction to that leaked audio. Remember that leaked audio we talked about earlier in the week that actually claimed that it was Goldie Brar speaking, and he claimed that it was Nijjar's killing. He said, I killed Nijjar, or we killed Nijjar, but it was not a political assassination. It was gang warfare. It was to do with drugs. And the whole leaked audio then smears Bhai Nijjar as being a drug dealer. So anyway, this guy's the first person in India publicly, certainly at a high level, to respond to this. And he said, I've always talked about the gang war, and this was all a result of a gang war, pointing to, of course, drug trafficking, weapons and rivalries between criminal gangs. And he called any suggestion of Indian government involvement, that word again, absurd. This is the word, obviously, that was the official response when Trudeau accused India. So, yeah, he's likewise used the same word, absurd. And he noted that Bhai Nijjar, along with Pama Brar and the gangster Arsh Dalla, were already, all of them, designated as terrorists under India's own UAPA legislation before any of this. And then he pointed to what he called improved intelligence cooperation between India and Canada under, specifically, interestingly, Mark Carney's government. So again, it does raise a lot of eyebrows. But unsurprisingly, it's a totally predictable... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, share this. It's a totally predictable response from India, and certainly from a high official. Basically, he would be part of the deep state of India. So it's not surprising that he's totally endorsed that leaked audio. But he is the first person, at least at a governmental, effectively, governmental level, to endorse it. It came out through the Gaudiya media, and he's the first public figure to say, yes, of course, it must have been a gang warfare killing. But would anybody be surprised otherwise? And then, just in the last 24 hours, a fourth voice has entered this argument, which again sharpens this whole sort of gang warfare story. Arsh Dalla, this character, Arsh Dalla, he's a Canada-based gangster, and he was actually named by Verma, who we just talked about. And he's also someone that Indian authorities have separately designated as a terrorist. And this guy, Arsh Dalla, he's released his own about 15-minute video responding directly to Gurdwara's leaked audio and the accusations in that. So Arsh Dalla totally and utterly denied any involvement in Nijjar's killing and said he wasn't with Nijjar on the day that he was murdered, and he hadn't had any contact with him for close to a year before that point. And he then actually went on to accuse Gurdwara himself of, quote, operating at the behest of agencies. Interesting. So this guy has also, this other gangster figure, has now publicly accused Gurdwara, as we and everybody else has been doing, saying you were acting on behalf of the Indian state to kill Nijjar. So he's turned that whole allegation back onto Gurdwara, not denying it exists, but instead it does. It basically said it does exist. It was the Indian state, and you were doing their bidding, which is quite serious. And essentially claimed that Gurdwara was going after his own family, alleging that cases against Arsh Dalla's parents had been orchestrated by Gurdwara. So clearly there's a lot of bad blood between the two. And is reported to have threatened retaliation against Gurdwara directly. But as I say, none of this is actually verified. It's just videos. It's just videos that have come onto social media, allegedly on behalf of these very high-profile, alleged terrorist figures. And essentially, it's one gang figure's video response to another's leaked audio. But ultimately, it's sitting in the middle of this three or maybe even four-way public argument raging around North America and, of course, India, who was actually ultimately guilty for the murder of Nijjar, and arguably, more importantly, why? Why was Nijjar killed? So, to bring all that together, what we have, as things stand today, is not one confirmed account of who killed Hardeep Singh Nijjar and why, but at least three competing and primarily unverified narratives. You've got a gang war account from Verma, and implicitly from Bra's own leaked audio. You've got a state direction account, in other words, it was the Indian state, from Sikhs for Justice and Gurpatnt Singh Pannun, who's now just named 6 real individuals. And then you've got Arsh Dalla's own counter-accusation, turning that state direction claim back onto Gurdwara. But what is confirmed is the underlying legal architecture of all this. A real Canadian murder prosecution against 4 named defendants. We've got a real US case against Bishnoi and Gurdwara. We've got a federal court fight in Canada over what evidence the public and the defence get to see. And then we've got this genuinely escalating threat against Gurpatnt Singh Pannun himself. He's just been served a threat to warn notice. All in the space of a week. In other words, there's a heck of a lot going on around this whole story. And trying to keep track of it is, as I say, everybody's got something to say about this story. But of course, all of it is just speculation, or a lot of it is certainly speculation. But the real truth, and this is always the challenge, to get the truth. And back to what I was saying earlier, the truth is probably somewhere in that intelligence that the Canadian government is fighting hard to stop being released into the public domain. in terms of national interest. It's in national interest. It's in the interest of preserving relationships, international relationships. In other words, it's probably about protecting India's reputation. Anyway, talking about Canada, let's go back to the Edmunton situation. It's almost a stabbing that happened recently in the Edmunton Gurdwara. And there's a bit of an update. It was the stabbing of two worshippers, 75-year-old and a 51-year-old apparently. And it happened at early morning prayers at Nanak Sahib Gurdwara in the Nanak Sahib Gurdwara Gursikh Temple, I think is its proper formal name. Now, of course, as I say, there's lots of different reports, again, about this, about the exact identities of the two gentlemen that were stabbed. But we do know that there were apparently two Sikh worshippers, 75, 51 years old, and some sources say one of them was actually a priest and one was a volunteer. We've never actually got to the bottom of the truth of that. Anyway, the man that's been arrested, apparently, as I think I talked about a couple of days ago, he'd apparently just been released from prison, literally days before the attack, under what Correctional Service the Correctional Service Canada, that organisation that's responsible for this, said was a statutory release. In other words, they had no choice but to release him, and it was not any sort of parole decision where they actually had a choice in the matter. And Canadian outlets, the news outlets, framed the story explicitly as happening as Alberta Gurdwara's face threats is the headline. Basically, it's a nod to a much wider, and I have to say, scarier pattern that's happening across North America, and again, it's Europe as well. This increasing trend of hate crimes against the Sikh community. And Mark Carney, as I said a couple of days ago, did actually, to his credit, at least come out and condemn the attack, saying no one should ever feel unsafe in their place of worship. And, well, you got my response on that one. But also reported, at the same time, there was that Calgary Dashmesh Culture Centre getting that phone call, that sort of anonymous phone call the weekend before the Edmunton attack, warning that heavy equipment was on the way to flatten the Sikh temple, flatten the Gurdwara. So again, it's all about this whole uncomfortable, wider pattern of violence and harassment and threats against the whole Sikh community. Anyway, Sikh Federation Canada, in its own reaction at the time, pointed to anti-immigration rhetoric that's just spreading everywhere. And of course, disinformation, primarily coming out of Hindutva and IT cells, as that sort of context that's helped drive these events like these stabbings, the threats against the Gurdwara itself. And I could play you a video also. Two developments, of course, since then. The World Sikh Organisation have just released a video. The title of the video, "We Can't Ignore the Rise of Anti-Sikh Hate." And it was built around drone and aerial footage of the Gurdwara itself. And the building is lovely. It's shown clean, whole and undamaged, fortunately. So clearly heavy equipment didn't arrive. But ultimately, it's less a piece of new reporting than actually a bit more about a community reflection. And it's a genuine step from one of, obviously, Canada's major Sikh advocacy organisations to try and keep the story in the public domain. In other words, we don't want people to forget or even be ignorant of what is happening to our Sikh community here in Canada. Let me just, I'll play it for you, actually. I've got the video here. I'll just play a bit of the video.
Be violated in such a brutal and aggressive way has been extremely disturbing.
He attacked two men, worshippers, aged 75 and 51, before police say others intervened and held him back.
He ended up attacking several individuals, two of whom have been hospitalized with injuries.
Their sense of safety shaken. That's what those who regularly come to this North Edmunton Gurdwara say they're feeling after a Friday morning stabbing in the wake of what the World Sikh Organization is calling an alarming time for the Sikh community in Alberta.
You've seen recently in Alberta that threats have been made against Gurdwaras. There's been minor vandalism at different Gurdwara sites, even here in Edmonton. And now we have this incident where somebody actually entered the premises and attacked members of the congregation.
We've been calling for proactive steps to address this for quite some time now. So Sikh Gurdwaras on the ground should be reevaluating their security protocols, and we think that police and government should take this seriously.
I think generally in the context of anti-Sikh hate, it's something that we've defined, that we talk about, we see it online. Everyone sees this rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, the rise of anti-Sikh hate, and yet so many people are silent. And today when you see a violent attack that takes place within what is one of the holiest places for Sikhs, within their Gurdwara, it sends a message that we're not safe and that the Sikh community is being targeted.
We've had so many incidents of the rise of anti-Sikh hate across this country. We need action to ensure that incidents like this don't happen again. We don't want to tolerate hate against any group.
So really, it's a very powerful appeal to the government of Canada saying, look, will you please take action? This is real. The community is living in fear. It is living under genuine, profound threat. So again, it is a very strong appeal to the government saying, you've got to do something about this. Anyway, but back to the stabbing in Edmonton. Apparently charges are now reported as pending against the suspect. And one of the local news outlets, Heartland News, reported on the 23rd of August, confirming that the 27-year-old man accused of those stabbings and apparently it happened at 5 a.m. So again, quite bizarre what time it happened. He's facing charges that are still being finalised by prosecutors. And they are pending charges. So again, it's nothing official, but ultimately, clearly the police are proceeding ahead. They've got enough evidence, clearly, to charge this guy. But taken together with that, the whole Calgary demolition threat, it does sadly, it remains this live public safety story for Alberta's Sikh community. Again, these are not isolated incidents. They are all part of this whole pattern, of this trend line that hate crime against the Sikh community is on the rise. It is not reducing. It is not going away. And unfortunately, these videos that the World Sikh Organisation released, these have to keep being put into the public domain just to remind people of how prevalent, how genuine this threat to their lives is on a daily basis. Just want to say what a beautiful Gurdwara. I've never seen a picture of it. It's a beautiful building. Absolutely fabulous, that. Anyway, oh, hello, where have you gone? There you are. Sorry, it's just approaching the end of the week. I'll lose my buttons, lose my marbles as well. Anyway, right, let's move on to our next story. And this guy, Sajjan Kumar. Yes, the story rumbles on. It's a bit of an update. Of course, this has been one of the biggest stories, really, that we've covered in recent weeks. This, of course, is the death of Sajjan Kumar. He is that 3-time Congress MP and this most senior Congress figure ever convicted over the genocide of 1984, at least part of the evil that was imposed upon the Sikh community in 1984. Anyway, of course, that genocide following the assassination of Indira Gandhi in retaliation for her murderous assault on the Daba Sahib saw those awful mobs rampaging through the streets of northwest India, Delhi and other cities, targeting specifically Sikhs, men, women and children, just in the most awful. I mean, I'm struggling for the words to describe it because adjectives, there are just no adjectives enough. When you research this, as I did for the first time, was it 3 years ago, it literally brought tears to my eyes. Actually understanding the realities of what happened in those few days. It goes beyond, and people say people are acting like animals, and as I often say, even animals would not have resorted to the depravity and the evil that so many people sunk to in those few days. All pushed on, incentivised, motivated by people like Sajjan Kumar. This guy has more than blood on his hands. And as I think as one of the commenters said earlier in the week, yeah, his journey to hell, well, it's going to be a very long, slow and painful one. If indeed, there is a proper judgment when we all go meet our maker. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, the estimates of those who were killed, they range from anything from 2,700 in Delhi alone, and that's an underestimate. 3,000 across India as a whole is, I think, the official statistic, but in reality, people actually think it runs into the tens of thousands, and many actually say over 20,000. So ultimately, that is the backdrop of what this guy was behind. And anyway, yeah, so Sajjan Kumar died in custody on the 20th of August. He was 80 years old, and he spent his final years serving 2 concurrent life sentences. One was from his December 2018 conviction over the Rajnagar and Palam colony killings, and the other from a February 2025 conviction over the murder of a father and son in Saraswati Vihar. And they were, get this, doused in petrol and burned alive, which is a very typical act that happened during that genocide. And women and children were treated the same. Tyres. They had tyres put around them so they couldn't move, doused in petrol and set alight in front of their own families. Anyway, a Supreme Court hearing on this guy, Sajjan Kumar's own parole plea, because he'd been trying to get out. He'd been asked for compassionate leave. I mean, a guy who showed no compassion in 1984, he asked for compassionate leave to go help his ailing wife, because apparently his ailing wife was in trouble. Anyway, but as it turned out, Sajjan Kumar died that very day that his hearing for parole, or at least compassionate leave, was being heard. And his record on accountability was actually pretty mixed up all the way to the end, because alongside those two convictions that I've mentioned, he'd also been acquitted in 3 separate cases in recent times. The most recent is actually as January this year, when the court said there was insufficient evidence each time. So he's got off countless other charges due to insufficient evidence. Anyway, so his death a few days ago triggered this huge political storm inside specifically the Congress party, as this guy, MP Deepinder Singh Hooda, then described him as a role model for the country, which of course then just set up an absolute firestorm of protest and outrage from all sides, it has to be said, even actually within the Congress party itself. And certainly Rahul Gandhi, it's remained relatively, he's tried to distance himself up from it, but even Rahul Gandhi became the target of some of the outrage, because then I think it was the DSGMC and a load of other protesters camped outside his house demanding that he actually issue an apology. And then separately, a whole load of protesters, Sikh protesters, burned an effigy of Gandhi over the remark. Now, Hooda did apologise for his remark. He did actually sort of step back a little bit. It wasn't a straightforward, clear, unambiguous apology, but ultimately he did try and at least sort of row back from what he said. But ultimately, there was a former Punjab Chief Minister Charanjit Singh Channy then called Sajjan Kumar in response to Hooda's remarks. He said he was a murderer of Sikhs, and said there can be absolutely no way that anybody in India must claim that this guy is a role model in any way, shape or form. Anyway, so all that's a little bit of background. Of course, he's had his funeral. According to the Sikh Press Association, they posted actually this up with a little bit more detail from Kumar's funeral and the aftermath of the funeral. And as per their report, Kumar was cremated apparently the day after his death, and then thousands of Indians lined the streets in Delhi, where he'd served, particularly as the Congress MP for Outer Delhi for apparently 30 years, between 1980 and 2009. And this post that headlines, "India mourns convicted Sikh genocide MP." Well, it also carries a little bit more detail about the condition of his custody. And this, again, is a little insight into Indian justice. Because apparently one prison officer in the prison that he was held at, which was Tihar prison, apparently told media that Sajjan Kumar was treated, apparently in the officer's own words, as a political prisoner, which implies that he was afforded round-the-clock carers and younger inmate carers in what's described as his geriatric quarters. So again, it implies that this guy was actually given a very easy ride, and not just an easy ride, he was actually taken care of as if he was in a care home in prison. And again, it resonates with past situations like Lawrence Bishnoi, for example, who allegedly has been given an easy ride. They're given access to mobile phones, they're given access to all sorts of privileges that any normal prisoner would never see or hear or be given. And it does appear that Sajjan Kumar, like many of these political prisoners, and that's the key term, political prisoners, and let me contrast that with genuine political prisoners like Amritpal Singh and others, but political prisoners who happen to be part of the Indian deep state, Sajjan Kumar clearly part of it, and the Indian deep state has done its absolute best for years to try and keep him out of prison, and when finally, thanks to the Sikh community and their absolutely laudable efforts over decades to bring people like this to justice, when the Indian state absolutely had no choice but to convict him because the evidence was overwhelming, then when he finally does get sent to prison, he's just treated with what's called kid gloves. He's given an easy ride. He's treated as if he actually wasn't a prisoner. He gets all the special privileges, etc. So again, when we talk about justice delayed is justice denied, I don't think there was even justice delayed. There was no justice whatsoever when it comes to people like this. And let us not forget also that there are many others like Sajjan Kumar who have blood on their hands, who still remain free today, who still walk the streets of Delhi and other areas in Punjab, who were part of that overall conspiracy, that agenda to whip up those mobs to murder tens of thousands of innocent men, women and children in 1984. Yet they still walk free. So there still remains justice to be seen. It's not even justice delayed. There is just no justice. And there will never be justice. The sad tragedy of all this is that people like Sajjan Kumar are the only people who are ever going to face any even hint of justice. Because so many have either passed away since of natural causes. They've basically spent their entire lives post-1984 living and enjoying a free life until they passed away, or those who may still be alive who are elderly now, they've still managed to live their full lives free of any justice, free of any accountability. And yet the families of those who died so horrifically in that genocide still have to bear those wounds today. Still, not just the wounds of losing loved ones in the most horrific manner, but knowing that the perpetrators still remain free and likely will never see justice in their lifetimes. That is one of the great tragedies of 1984, one of the great tragedies of Punjab during those periods of 1980s and 1990s, that justice is just never delivered, which again leads always to the one single conclusion. And this is why the Sikh community should rally around, as most indeed are, the whole Khalistan cause, because there will never be any justice or indeed freedom from this level of persecution until Sikhs live in their own sovereign land. They have control not just of their own decision making, their own policy making, their own economy, but their borders. They can control their own lives. And only then can Sikhs genuinely live free of fear. Because ironically, that fear, as I've talked about in today's show, isn't just in the Punjab, it's in Canada, it's here in the UK, it's in California, it's right across the world. Duty to warn notices are still being issued to the Sikh community. Even today, 2026, all these years after 1984, Sikhs are still living in fear of the Indian state. And that is something that is never going to change until Sikhs get Khalistan, until Sikhs get a land that they can all move to, knowing it provides genuine sanctuary and genuine autonomy and genuine sovereignty. So that really is why the whole community and everybody outside the community, people like myself, must continue the fight, must continue to attend the protests, get the Khalistan flag out there publicly at every opportunity to support every initiative that pushes that Khalistan agenda forward on a day-to-day basis. Whether it is Gurpatan Singh Pannun on social media with his great sensationalist rhetoric, whether it is the Sikh Federation International in the United Nations lobbying the UN rapporteurs, whether it's in Azerbaijan meeting with the government ministers at all these countries around the world, building bridges, building the alliances. Everybody has a part to play in this. You guys out there, you wonderful loyal audience, as I often say, if you ever feel alone in the Khalistan cause, don't, because there are millions, we know tens of millions of Sikhs out there in the world, whether it's in Punjab or in the diaspora, all support this whole concept, this simple concept of sovereignty. But it can only happen if we keep putting one step forward after another. Everybody has a part to play. We are not just one single voice, each one of us. We are united in pushing this whole agenda, all of us together. Because when people get together, even if it's Khalistan Football Association match, the number of Khalistan flags there, people wearing T-shirts, Again, even these relatively small events, they all have a massive impact globally. Because the more Khalistan flags, the more Khalistan merchandise, the more Khalistan name gets mentioned in all these contexts, the more the world wakes up and realises it is real. It is a real concept that is genuinely supported by the whole Sikh community. And then, and only then, can that whole democratic movement win, push it over the line. But all of us have got our parts to play. Anyway, sorry, I've been preaching because, again, it's really important that, as I say, the only justice that we'll ever get for people like this, evil people like this, can really, the best response is to get Khalistan, is to achieve and establish Khalistan. That is the best response to Indira Gandhi, to Sajjan Kumar, to all those evil people in the past who've targeted and oppressed and murdered. The Butcher of Punjab, KPS Gill, all these characters. It's this gallery of villains. Villains is too euphemistic a term. It's too soft a term. They're more than villains. They are evil people who have the blood of tens of thousands of Sikhs on their hands. So the only suitable response to all of them is Khalistan. Anyway, let's move on now. To move on to our comments columns. So, thank you to you guys. I was going to dig into some of the live comments because actually in, which day's show was it? It was Monday or Tuesday, whichever show it was. Anyway, you guys made some great comments actually, and it was great to see you guys having a good discussion in the live comments. It's a shame today's not live because I really love it when we do the live shows because then it's great to have that sort of two-way discussion where you guys ask questions and I can actually talk in real time and we can talk about it. And you can actually, when I've got a question, when I've got something I don't understand, you guys are straight there with the answer, which is always really helpful. Anyway, but of course Thursdays tends not to be a live show, so apologies for that. Maybe it will be actually. Maybe going forward it's not impossible. It also could become a live show. We'll see. Anyway, but as I say, I do like to just review. I always do review the live comments because of course when I'm talking in the show, it's very hard for me to dip into the live comments because I've got screens everywhere which I'm trying to control and buttons that my tired old brain is working out which one to press. So anyway, let's move on. Stay safe in this show. I love this comment actually from Stay Safe. Stay Safe, as always, made hundreds of comments, all great comments. But it was these ones actually I thought were actually worth highlighting. It was all about jealousy, and it was about who and what Sikhs are globally, or Sikhs as we call them here in the UK. We emigrated a long time ago. We built big homes. We worked hard when we fled Punjab. And it's when these Indians come out and make all these these awful comments, and they smear the Sikh community. Oh, you're all drug runners. You're all, and I see it myself on social media. I see some of the accusations that come from Hindutva, or even just ordinary Hindus. It's quite sad actually when I read these things. And essentially, as you rightly say, Stacey, a lot of it is just simple jealousy because we do know, and I've seen this completely objectively. I can say this absolutely objectively, is that wherever Sikhs land, anywhere in the world, they are driven. They are driven people, not just by their faith alone, but just by their genes. They are driven to build, to create, to build businesses, to build communities. They are not idle. There are many races, for some bizarre reason, that are genetically made to be idle. Sikhs are definitely not that. This is probably why they made such great warriors over the centuries, is that wherever they land, they are genetically driven to build, to create, to grow, to develop. They are entrepreneurs. And essentially, yeah, it's jealousy. It is, a lot of it is just sheer resentment from other communities that hate the fact that wherever Sikhs go, as a generalisation, they succeed. So anyway, I just wanted to point out, thank you, Stacey. I don't want to talk about that comment because I say it just summarises something that I feel very strongly about. My admiration for the community knows no bounds, as indeed it does with many white British people. This is why white British people have such an admiration, and I'm sure it's reflected in North America as well. In fact, I know it is because I've seen it on social media. The comments always from white British people about the Sikh community are always so full of admiration for the Sikh community, and I have to say almost uniquely to the Sikh community. They don't share the same admiration for other communities for whatever reasons, but certainly it is justified in the Sikh community. Anyway, Gabra made this comment. Baba Khalsa and ISI, the two words always used, they are the default accusations that, as you rightly said, the Indian government always jump to. If they need a villain, if they need to somehow smear anybody in the Sikh community, they always jump to two organisations. It's either Baba Khalsa or it's ISI, Pakistan Intelligence. Because, as I said in the show, we talked about Baba Khalsa and that supposed arrest and allegations of a small group of young terrorists, young Sikh boys who were arrested and found allegedly with arms and ammunition, a bit of explosives. Yes, of course they were Baba Khalsa. They were backed by ISI. It's a tired old mechanism that the Indian government and the Indian Godi media, of course, always jump to, because it's a very convenient label, because the moment you label somebody as being part of Baba Khalsa, everybody who's watching, yes, okay, it's Baba Khalsa, they're terrorists, they're evil, It's a very easy, off-the-shelf accusation, a bit like Air India, which of course Baba Khalsa was likewise accused of being behind. So, and of course, Pakistan Intelligence. Again, I've been accused, as we know, of being an agent for Pakistan Intelligence, which is hilarious. I think yesterday, it was yesterday or 2 days show ago, I was accused of being working for British intelligence, which is great. I must be the most intelligent guy in the world because I'm working for all these intelligence services, which is great. I just wish they were paying me. Anyway, WHO Panzer. Oh yes, this is important. I did mention this in 2 days show ago. If you guys, as I say, there is an offline discussion group being put together. I've had no emails as yet, but if you guys who WHO Panzer mentions in this, if you want to email me, there you go, message@satledgetv.com. If you email me, I can then put you all in touch offline, so you all don't need to put your email addresses in the public domain. I can then put you all in touch with each other, and then you can form this group. So you guys stay safe. Avtar Dylan, Darmandar Bannins. If you guys want to get in touch, please message me. Thanks for those comments. And this is an important discussion where I had to publicly apologise because, of course, the thumbnail that I'd used was it contained an image of the guru, of one of the gurus. Was it Guru Nanak Dev Ji? I think it was. I forget which guru it was. I think it was Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And of course, it evoked a few comments saying, you mustn't do this. You must never display an image of the gurus. And I said, well, look, I can only be led by the community because I've seen two schools of thought on this. And Satellite TV official line, I think from the US and Phoenix, is we must not show images of the guru. But at the same time, Avtar says, you don't need to apologise. It's okay to use these images of the gurus. They're in the Gurdwaras. Don't worry. But then with TC, on the other side, look, we don't mortalise the gurus. In other words, the argument not to show images of the gurus is it mortalises them somehow. The gurus remain, I'll probably get this wrong, but certainly my perception is the gurus remain in eternal spirituality, that you can't diminish them, you can't reduce them into a mortal image or just even as you say, mortalise them. It's seen as disrespectful. It minimises their sort of great spiritual universal presence or size in spiritual terms. So we all live in other words, there is no actual correct answer, it appears, because there are two schools of thought. And clearly the community does seem divided about this very one issue. And I don't think there is a right and wrong answer. It just depends what your own faith feels. And I think to tread the line in between, I would suggest you just do what you do. Don't be offended by the other side, because no side is trying to offend the other side. They're just doing what they do in their own belief and their own faith. I hope I've got through that without offending anybody. It's a minefield, of course it is. When you talk about such sensitive subjects, it's such a minefield. It's so easy to upset people. Anyway, hopefully, we've reached a conclusion. Anyway, back to, I think, okay, these are the sort of the recorded comments as opposed to the live comments now. Kuldip, hello, Kuldip. This story about the bomb plot, it sounds a lot like the Air India, does it not? It does indeed. There are so many parallels. Of course, the scale is very different. This was just a very small bomb plot in the border regions near Amritsar, or up near the Pakistan border. But ultimately, the framing is exactly the same. It was Baba Khalsa. It was these young Baba Khalsa terrorists that were planning to set off a bomb to kill maximum amount of people. As indeed, the Kanishka bombing was allegedly launched by Baba Khalsa, designed to kill 329 people. Yeah, it's the same modus operandi. It's that very convenient. Let's take the label off the shelf of Baba Khalsa. Let's apply it because it carries so much weight, so much symbology for the Indian government. And if you're somebody who doesn't know anything about it, and you see, oh, Baba Khalsa, who are they? Oh, they were this terrorist organisation. Then immediately you can then label whoever has been accused of being Baba Khalsa. Oh, yes, you must be one of those terrorists. And it puts like a whole suit, a whole package of allegations against an individual who might be nothing to do with this organisation, if indeed it ever did exist. So, yeah, it is. It's the parallels. It's taking off the shelf. This is what they do very well. They take these things off the shelf, like Air India. Every time they want to have a go at the Sikhs in the public domain, oh, yes, they were the people behind the Air India bombing, as if it's fact, which obviously it isn't. Stuff to muffins. RSS, run India, has a very, very low-level intellect. They're just like this, and with power nowadays becoming a threat to humanity. Yeah, you see, I never underestimate the RSS. Their intellect is, well, clearly, they have a high intellect. They're a very effective organisation. They've been around for a very long time. However, you're absolutely right in saying that they are I don't know about a threat to humanity. They are certainly a threat to democracy. They are certainly a threat to freedom. And most of all, they're a definite, real threat to the Sikh community. So, absolutely. Kuldip's back again. India does the crime, Baba Khalsa does the time. Actually, that's a great phrase. I like that. Yeah. Whether it's the Kanishka bombing, whether it's that alleged attempted bombing a few days ago in Punjab. India does the false flag, Baba Khalsa pays the price, effectively. Sukhwant. Oh, this is interesting. Some Khalistani groups stand by India. Well, the knee-jerk reaction to this comment is, well, how could they? If you believe in Khalistan, how on earth could you believe in India? Certainly as India as it stands today. If you're a Khalistani, you believe in your own sovereignty, you believe in your own nation. But actually, there is a nuance, is the word. I like that word, nuance. There is a nuance to this, because actually some Khalistanis can absolutely stand by the concept of India, just a different India. And I can actually align with this. I actually align with the concept of a Hindu Rashtra. I've said this before. Let us all support a Hindu Rashtra, because if the Hindus and the extremist Hindus get their Hindu Rashtra, that means by logic and by perfectly reasonable argument, they in turn must allow Khalistan and an independent J&K or an independent Manipur, Tamil Nadu, whatever. But if they get their Hindu Rashtra, which actually arguably they can call India, they can have the name, we don't care, have it. Call it India. Call it whatever you want. As long as we get Khalistan, you have your India. So that's how I would interpret your comment. I don't actually believe that there are many, in fact, any Khalistanis who actually believe in the whole concept of India today as it stands, which essentially includes Khalistan. How could it, logically? Stay safe. Yes, and actually this goes back to what you were saying earlier, actually, is that, likewise, typical Sikh family, emigrated from Punjab, built bigger homes, worked hard, built successful lives. Integrated family. And again, the lesson in the diaspora of all the communities that have integrated the best, I cannot think of one single community that has integrated into Western democracies better, more effectively than the Sikh community. I challenge anybody from any other community to say otherwise, because that's why they are so popular, to put it bluntly. That's why Sikhs are so popular in all the communities. So anyway, yeah, as you're right to say, it all started going wrong when the other Indian diaspora, other Indians, Hindus, started also emigrating to the same locations. And unfortunately, and I'm not labelling all Hindus, because I've had Hindu friends in the past. I know many decent Hindus. But there are some Hindus who brought with them organised crime and many other negative aspects that they brought from India with them. And because of that, that has turned the native white population, for want of a better description, but essentially the people who were there first, and I'm not going to call them indigenous, but the people who were there first in these diaspora countries then have turned on Indians, saying, look, you brought your organised crime. We don't want you in our country if you're going to bring crime. But unfortunately, because of that, they're now labelling Sikhs within the Indian diaspora, which is deeply unfair, because Sikhs are not responsible for Indian organised crime and all the other negative aspects that other Hindus have brought with them. That's the distinction. And I think it is very sad that that Sikhs are being labelled under that umbrella term as Indians. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat, as you say. It is sad, and I think this is deeply unfair, particularly for the right wing in the West, who are a little bit blinkered, to put it politely, in their view. Anybody with a brown skin, they're all the same, aren't they? That's the sort of the right wing blinkered, I have to say, slightly unintelligent perception. But of course, if you're a Sikh, you're lumped in that same umbrella. When ironically, there are those, actually, as it turns out, in the right wing, and even the extremists, who even in the extreme right wing respect Sikhs because they see them as different. They know, they understand the qualities that the Sikh community bring. They're not Indians. They see Sikhs for what they are, a warrior race. And a patriotic one. That's the big thing. Deeply patriotic about the countries that they build their lives in. Sufton muffins with an extra long line of ice cream cones and celebratory, whatever they are. Thank you, Sufton muffins. Thanks for that. TC, hello TC. Nice to see you again with a couple of Sat Sri Akals. And Gummo and Greywell with our daily Sat Sri Akal, a few more than usual. Nice to see. And here we go. Murgiv's log Rinku with one of his regular Khalistanis Zindabads. Absolutely. And once again, what is it with Murgiv's logs Rinku? Always ends up as the final comment. Maybe it's just become a bit of a ritual. Ultimately, though, we all align with it. We all agree with it. It's a fantastic way to sign off. That is it for today's show. Thank you for all your contributions. Thanks for staying with me. As always, do keep your comments coming. Do let me know your thoughts. Send me links on email, message at sutlodg.com. If there's something you'd like to bring to my attention, as many of you have been doing, that is appreciated. But let me know your thoughts. I've got my podcast uploading tomorrow with Dr. Greywell. We're talking about two very important subjects. Firstly, we're talking about politics of Punjab, but this time about how Delhi is centralising power. In other words, it's sucking power out of Punjab deliberately and keeping that control of Punjab more centrally in Delhi. And Dr. Greywell is setting out a whole argument, a perfectly reasonable argument, of why actually this is an authoritarian power grab. It reflects other authoritarian countries. And actually, we should try and push for a reversal. It is up to the community to push for that reversal, to decentralise power from Delhi back to the Punjab. And whether that's through our local political parties in Punjab or whatever. But anyway, do watch the podcast for that. The second half of the podcast is equally important, and that is the 30th of August. In just a couple of days, is it now? 30th of August is a day dedicated to remembering those who lost their lives in the 1980s and 1990s, and particularly, specifically, the work of and the legacy of Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra. So the 30th of August is a big day to mark Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra and those that disappeared effectively in the 1980s and 1990s. So there's a discussion about that as well, and some very important information about that. So do watch that, please, tomorrow. That'll be uploaded tomorrow morning. But that's it for another day. That is it indeed for another week, apart from the podcast. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend, you guys. God willing, I will be back on Monday, live at 5 UK time. It would be great if you join me. Please do put it in your calendars, put it in your diaries, whatever. Put it on your announcing things on your phones, whatever. Join me live at 5. It's great when you join me. It's great to talk to you. But that's it for another day. Have a great day. I will catch you guys next Monday. Have a great weekend.